from a branding standpoint, super simple, very, very clear. Clarity is your friend. The other thing that I would mention there is making sure you actually pay off that thing. So whatever the show's going to be about, make sure you pay it off.
Most hosts never achieve the results they hoped for. They're falling short on listenership and monetization, meaning their message isn't being heard and their show ends up costing them money. This podcast was created to help you grow your listenership and make money while you're at it. Get ready to take notes. Here's your host, Adam Adams.
Hey, podcaster, it's your host, Adam Adams, and I haven't done an interview in a while, so I'm really excited to be doing an interview. But something interesting is I've had this same friend for years. We go back because we both did a lot of real estate. And he and I are going to be talking about, or he's going to be telling you how you can really know what your why is about a podcast. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to fail. You're going to fail big if you don't understand your why. That's critically one of the most important first pieces. And if you don't have it now, figure it out and start going in that direction to be able to put out better content for the best person that you want to be connected with. This is John Casmon, and he is the host of the show Multifamily Insights. I'm pulling it up in front of me now. And it looks like he has hundreds of ratings and reviews, hundreds, as well as 650 some odd episodes. So he's got some experience doing this. And I want to start here, John. Did you ever mess up your why? Is that why you decided that needed to be today's podcast? And if it is, let's start there.
Yeah, absolutely. So starting out with my podcast, one, I jumped into it mainly because I was told, hey, if you want to get in this business and raise capital for real estate deals and build a brand, you need to have a podcast or a thought leadership platform more broadly.
Was it a mentor or something that told you that?
Mentor, but just not just the mentor, other folks in the space.
Okay.
They kind of gave me that feedback. And I come from marketing and advertising, so I got it, right? You need some mechanism where people can get to know you, learn about what you do, and figure out whether or not they want to work with you. Where if I could go back, where I think I missed an opportunity was not being clear on what my podcast was about, more specifically, who was meant to help, how I was going to help them, and ultimately how I was going to benefit from it. So when I initially launched my podcast, it was called Target Market Insights. We have since rebranded to be called Multifamily Insights, so it's more encompassing. But I launched really focusing on myself. I had started that show trying to figure out how to find the best places to invest. And I certainly thought other people would benefit from that topic, which is really important. And I couldn't find any other podcasts that were talking about that. But once I kind of got further into the show and had more episodes under my belt, I realized that I had kind of answered my own personal question of how to find the best places to invest. And I didn't know where to take the show from there. And at that moment, I was faced with this, fork in the road where I could either say, all right, hey, got my answer to the question. Let's go ahead and wrap this thing up and end the show. Or we need to make a pivot so it stays interesting, not just for me, but for our audience, and gives us something where we can build and help other people along that journey.
When did you start it? I feel like it's been 6 years or so.
Yeah, it's been at least 7 years. So I want to say like maybe 2017 or something like that.
Okay. That's pretty cool. And I want to make sure that I got this right. You said you weren't originally clear on your why. You didn't really know what your podcast was all about. And the three things that kind of helped you to get to the place where you can hone that in. I think you said, I had to identify who my show is for. I had to identify like what I want that person to get out of listening to my show. And third, I needed to figure out how could that benefit me. So who is it for? How does it benefit them? And how does it benefit my business? Is that right?
That's right. And if I were going back, I would certainly make sure you understand who is the show for, how do they benefit, or what's the promise to them when they listen to your show, and then how does it benefit your business. Where I kind of made a slight error is I built a show that was for people learning how to find the best places to invest. I made a show where we talked to those guests and we asked them questions directly on, hey, what metrics are you looking for? And what do you pay attention to? And, how are you making these decisions? even at the micro level. So we could pick a macro market like Dallas, Texas, but how do you know which part of Dallas, Texas, right? If I'm not from Dallas, how do I look at this data and figure out I want to be in this area versus that area? Where I missed an opportunity was I didn't think through how it really benefited my business. At that time, I didn't have a coaching program, and I was really looking to connect with other investors, really passive investors who are looking to invest alongside me in my deals. What I didn't really process was those individuals are less concerned with that. They really want you to do all that work and figure out where to invest. They're concerned with their money, how to identify a good deal to invest in, what should passive investors know about investing, what kind of returns should they expect. They wanted to learn more about the actual investing side for them and what the benefits were to them. And my show was really geared more towards that active investor who was looking to find the best places to invest so that they could find these deals. So there's a little bit of a disconnect, and it took me a minute to figure that out, to recognize that, wow, we're not really growing as much as I could because we're not giving the answers or the value to the people we were initially looking to help. And part of that was because, again, I initially launched that show for my own personal needs, to help me figure out the best places to invest and how to find those areas so I could be a better operator and a better investor. So there was a slight disconnect between what I originally wanted to get out of the show and the audience that I was hoping to serve through that podcast.
So I love that. Okay, what you wanted to get out of the show was, at the time, a little bit more important. And in a way, it served its purpose because it allowed you to really dial in on the best metrics, seeing how everybody thinks through it, and allowing you to be one of the best at finding really good markets that have a tailwind instead of a headwind. And by this, for the listener, John syndicates apartment communities. And John, you can share what that means real quick, like give us an overview of what that business model is, since a lot of our listeners, they have different types of coaching programs. Yeah. Why don't you share what is that business model, and then we'll go into some more questions.
In short, I just help people invest in apartments, right? So there's two ways we do it. One, people can invest alongside us in our deals. So if you think about it, most people may want to invest in real estate. They take the money they have saved up. They may go out and buy a house or a duplex or a small rental. Well, instead of everyone going out and doing that by themselves, we'll pull all the money together. And now instead of, having $100,000 to make an investment, we might take $2 or $3 million to go out and buy a larger property, hire third-party management, and run it more professionally. So that's called apartment syndication. That's kind of the backbone of what we do. We also coach and help other people learn how to raise capital for the deals that they want to take on.
Yeah. And out of curiosity, so initially you were thinking you might not have, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you might not have had like a very clear picture of the three pieces. Who is it for? What will they get out of it? And what will I get out of it? You kind of thought, this is the person that I hope listens. And at the same time, you were like, I want to learn more about, being better at this craft. But there was a disconnect in some way where it's like, oh crap, if I really thought about it a little bit more, I could have engineered this show to not only help me learn my craft and connect with more people in my space, and also to add value to the person that I want to work with. Is that right?
That's precisely it. And I would even say I set the second, and I don't think I spent any time thinking about the first, right? I just said, what do I want this podcast to be about? And I said, well, what do I want to know about? What do I want to learn? And I picked, I wanted to learn how to find the best markets, and I couldn't find that information out there. I thought it was a great opportunity to go out there and do that. And I didn't really think about, well, will this give people the information they need to want to do business with me, or at least to inquire about doing business with me? I really kind of locked in on this notion of, here's a topic I want to learn about. We're going to make a show about it.
Yeah.
And once I got down that path, I realized, wow, I'm not really reaping the benefits that I kept hearing people talk about from launching this show. As a matter of fact, my guests were reaping the benefits. I was having guests reach out to me saying, hey man, I just got an investor that heard me on your podcast. Keep up. You're doing great work. I'm like, well, that's interesting. No one called me.
Why didn't you call me?
So it just made me really process to say, okay, hey, there might be some things we're not doing right. Obviously we're getting some great value for people on a very important topic, but we also have to make sure that we are making this thing work for what we're trying to do and that it's mutually beneficial and not just a one-way conversation or one-way value.
All right. So let's get a little gritty on, you had a rebrand for the show. It went from, I think you said Target Market Insights, and that's what it was when I met you.
Yep.
And now it's Multifamily Insights. Now,
Yep.
You might have changed that a couple of years back, didn't you?
Yes, it
Okay.
did.
And so take us back to that place and you thinking through these 3 questions and deciding, this is what I wanted to be about. This is what I wanted it to be for. This is what I want to get out of it and what I want them to get out of it. And say it in a way like for our listener who might be in a totally different genre, totally different business. How do they think through either branding a podcast or rebranding a podcast?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, branding a podcast properly the first time is definitely easier than rebranding a podcast because you've now have some connective tissue and some history that you have to keep in mind. But when you're initially starting out, the first thing I would want to do is think about your audience and the promise that you are making to the listener. And when I say promise, what I really mean is, what is the value a listener gets if they listen to your show? One of the issues or mistakes or missed opportunities I had was Target Market Insights was not very clear. Now, I come from marketing where understanding a target market is just normal vernacular. So for me, it was this overlap of a marketing term in advertising and marketing and a real estate term when it came to the actual location. And I intended it to be this duality of figuring out your target market and how to figure out the insights that can help you connect to this target market. I got it, right? The guy in advertising and multifamily, but the person scrolling through Apple Podcasts and quickly trying to figure out a show to listen to, they're not thinking that hard and long about the show title. So if it was, Target Market Insights or Apartment Investing Podcast, they would click on Apartment Investing Podcast, right? So you can't overthink this because people are not going to pay you very much attention. They're going to scroll, they're going to look at a picture, they're going to see the name of the show, and either it's something that's going to grab their attention and they're going to know exactly what this show is going to be about and the kind of value they're going to get if they download and listen to an episode, or they're going to be confused and just keep scrolling. Yeah. So one, you just have to keep it super direct. I'm going to say simple, but I don't mean to say it can't have any intrigue or, a hook or anything like that. But they have to understand exactly what your show is going to be about. If it's something vague like insightful monologue, like I would assume that's like some deep poetry or actors type thing, right? So you just got to make sure people understand what the show's about just off the title, right? It can't be something where I have to go to the show notes or I've got to read the bio on the show to figure out what this thing's about. It's got to be in the title. So I think from a branding standpoint, super simple, very, very clear. Clarity is your friend. The other thing that I would mention there is making sure that you actually pay off that thing. So whatever the show's going to be about, make sure you pay it off, because what you don't want,
what do you mean by paying it off?
Yeah. So this is actually going back to our history, Adam. This is a tip I got from Adam, not necessarily about podcasting. This was actually from meetups. Yeah, you may recall this conversation we had many years ago, and we talked about how to grow a meetup. And one of the things that we talked about, and again, Adam gave me this feedback, so let's give him credit. He said, when you're hosting a meetup, if you call that meetup title, how to underwrite a deal in 5 minutes. I'm just using that as an example. Make sure you tell the people who show up how to underwrite a deal in 5 minutes. Don't use a title and then get up there and just talk about how great you are as an investor and loosely, play around underwriting, but never actually pay off that thing that hooked people in the first place. And I think that's important. So if you're going to title an episode or have your show title, make sure you're giving people the value that they signed up for. Don't do a bait and switch. Don't do this just a little teaser situation. If they see the value, they'll stay. they'll stick with you. They'll subscribe. They'll leave a review. They'll make it a favorite. They'll share your episode, right? So make sure you pay that off. And that was a great piece of feedback. It seems simple and obvious, but I don't know about you, but I've gone to a number of events where if, I showed up and it was, hey, here's how to save $10,000 on your taxes. And I'm like, oh, this sounds great. And at no point did they ever tell me how to save money on my taxes, right? They tried to sell me some program that was like $20,000 or something crazy. But at no point did I get the value that I was alluded to in the title or the initial invite. So I think that's really important as well. So one, clarity with the name of the show, but then two, make sure you pay off that value proposition.
I started my first podcast called Creative Real Estate Podcast. And I thought to myself, okay, this is going to get me big. This is going to make my name big. This is going to get people to know who I am. I'm going to interview other people in the space, get to know them, and it did most of the things. But what it didn't ever do, well, it barely kind of did, was brought me passive investors. And that's because creative real estate speaks to the person who needs creativity in order to do a deal. And the person with a whole bunch of money who just needs it to be simple and not creative just needs to passively invest. So I ended up selling that podcast for a similar reason that you rebranded yours, is because I said, finally, this is getting in front of the wrong person. This is helping the operator. This is helping someone like me, but I needed to add value to someone not like me. I needed to add value to somebody who had way too much money and not enough time, not somebody who has way too much time and not enough money. So love that you said that. You mentioned your show title needing to be simple and direct. Clarity is your friend. On this podcast, we have mentioned a bunch of times, there's two ways to really title and subtitle your podcast. You can be clear and concise, or you can be creative and catchy. The creative and catchy, just like John said earlier, when someone's scrolling and they see that title, it doesn't really grab their attention. It might be creative, it might be cool, it might be a little catchy or interesting, but if it's not clear and concise, if it doesn't say what they're going to get out of it, if it doesn't say who it's for, like this is the podcast on podcasting to help you launch, grow, monetize, and inspire. That's clear and concise. It isn't creative at all. It's not really catchy. And same thing, when we go to target market insights, it's like, what does that mean? That might sound cool, but I don't know if it's for me. Now it's multifamily insights. And the person seeing it says, yeah, I want to be in multifamily investing. And I'm wondering what these insights are. Maybe I should listen. So clear and concise versus creative and catchy. So I love that you said clarity is your friend, be simple and direct. So you did all of that. And what I would like to hear, and I think the listener might be curious, now that you've rebranded the show, have you seen more coaching clients come in? Have you gotten more passive investors? Has anything like that changed that you maybe have a story about since the rebranding?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple things have happened, right? So one, and I think this is really important as well, is understanding the conversations you want to have. I mean, the branding is one thing for sure, right? But beyond the branding, going back to that payoff, well, what kind of conversations do you want to have? What kind of information and topics do you want to discuss? And make sure you're paying that off, because that's what's really going to help that listener. And ultimately, if you want to bring on more clients, that's kind of where you have to focus, is the meat and potatoes of the actual dialogue. So we've seen great growth in our investor list. We've seen great growth with our coaching clients. And a lot of that is because we now service those individuals. We have conversations that are about multifamily investing, but we do try to lock in on, I harp on the word insights, because it's one thing to just talk about multifamily in the industry and, oh, I bought this property for XYZ a door and I did this, but that's not insight. That's just the story of what you did, right? The insight is the thing that most people might miss. I'll give you an example. If I were to tell you on my first syndication deal, I partnered with another group, I raised around $500,000, total raise was around $6 million. We went out, we put a 7-year loan on the property. We managed it for 4 years, sold it for a nice profit, right? That's the story. Now, there might be things that intrigue you, might be things that are interesting, but the insight for a listener is that on my first syndication deal, I partnered with another experienced group, that I didn't have to do the entire deal by myself, that I was able to leverage those connections and the experience to work together and have a successful investment. So now we might get into, well, how did you vet that deal? How did you vet those partners? How did you know them? What made you comfortable bringing investors in for your, this is your first syndication deal. So what got those investors comfortable with you, right? These are the things our listeners trying to understand, right? Because if they're trying to syndicate themselves, these are the concerns they have, right? Is, well, how do I pick the right people? Or it might be, oh, I didn't even know I could do that. I wasn't even thinking that. I was over here trying to find a deal, underwrite a deal, talk to brokers, raise capital. I'm trying to do everything in the world. And I didn't even think, oh, maybe I just partner with other people. So that may be an aha for a listener, right? The other aha might be, okay, I have some people I think may invest with me, but what do I need to do to get them comfortable? What kind of questions should I be asking? What kind of comments or objectives do I need to address? So that's where we like to get into it a little bit more, is understanding like some of the back end things that are stopping people from seeing success. So once we kind of made more of a pivot to really focusing on the insights involved in multifamily investing, scaling a portfolio, syndicating, raising capital, investing as a passive investor, that's where we really started to see the growth, because now we're providing more value for that listener.
I love it. So I want to ask, you said you definitely did notice, since the change, growth with the investor list and growth with the coaching clients. And that probably takes more than one thing. So going back to your insights, let's get what's behind all this. That probably takes more than one thing to be able to grow the investor list. It can't just happen by changing the name. It probably also needed you to have a little bit different content and maybe even a different call to action. So would you mind sharing what else you did to get more people on the list of investors that want to passively join you in your syndication, and how to get more coaching clients through a podcast?
Well, this may seem pretty obvious to your listeners, so forgive me. And as a former marketer myself, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but on my podcast, I never had a call for action, right? We would do our show. My call for action was to subscribe, follow, share the episode, but never to join my list and start to build a relationship offline or in the mediums where I could have a little bit more control. So one of the biggest things I did was simply let people know that, hey, we've got this, this sample deal package available on our website. Go to casmoncapital.com/sample deal, access what a sample deal package looks like, start wrapping your head around some of these terms, and then see what a deal can look like. And then we can reach out and have a conversation about that. I never told people we had this on the podcast. Now, if you were already on my email list, or if I were somewhere else, yes, I would share that, but I never talked about it on the podcast. So one, just highlighting some of those things that we had on the podcast was very helpful. The other thing which was very helpful for me was people need to have conversations with people who are like them. And it's great to have conversations with these super successful people who have built these huge portfolios. But some of my favorite podcasts, and I think some of the podcasts that help our listeners the most, are for people who are a step ahead of where they want to be. So that person who's done their first syndication deal, and maybe they only raised $300,000 or $400,000 for it. Now I say only, I think, anything is big when you're starting out, but $300,000 is very practical for your listener. When I talk about, hey, this is somebody who's raised $50 million, they can't equate that to where they're at. It's too far of a leap. So a lot of what they may hear next doesn't feel as relevant to them, which is why I do like to start on the first part of that journey when I'm talking to somebody who's more established. But for that person who just did it, it's so fresh. The challenges that they overcame, like you can hear it in their voice when they're telling a story. And those messages really connect with our audience. And that helps so many people to see themselves and to maybe overcome some of those fears or limited beliefs, because they can hear the story from somebody who was just like them 6 months ago, 3 months ago even, not, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And I think that's really helpful for people.
Yeah. I have a similar story, and it is in the syndication space and with my podcast, because I remember not having I call them a CTA, call to action. I never had a CTA. I don't know. I think I had a limiting belief, and you can tell me if this was you at all. It might be the listener. I think it's probably the listener. You tell me if you agree. But I had some type of limiting belief that if I offered for my listener to join my passive investor list or anything else, coaching, then they would think that I was doing my podcast for the wrong reason. And then that would make me look like a bad person who was greedy and only wanted money. And so I never offered it. And I started that podcast in 2016, 3.5 years later, in the middle of 2019, I had all these extra episodes. So we did 30 ads in 30 days. I did 30 episodes, and all of them had an ad that basically said, if you're ready to invest with us, I'm ready to have that conversation with you. All you got to do is scroll down, click, and book a free call. We can talk about working together. So I did that, and we had approximately 20 conversations in 2 months. So I did it for 30 days, but some people didn't listen immediately. We had about 20 conversations, which isn't very much, really. And we raised about $10 million of pre-commitments, more than we had already had. And so it ended up making a huge difference. And really the only thing that I did was threw out a bunch of ads for a month, and we had $10 million more just waiting. One of the guys had $3 million just by himself. He's like, hey, I want to invest with you. So he kind of did most of it. And a few other people had 50 grand or 100 grand or $250,000 or something. And it ended up doing pretty good. And just like you said, John, it went from never having a call to action, like join my list, to now I've got a call to action that says we can work with you. And it worked. So that's kind of cool. What about your coaching clients? What did you do differently to increase the amount of clients that you had to work with?
Well, one, we're not going to gloss over what you just said, right? By adding a call to action, you were able to raise $10 million in pre-committed dollars, in about 2 months.
Yeah.
Incredible, right? Incredible. So when we talk about the power of a call to action, you just shared it, right? And the thing that Adam's getting at in the syndication space, trust is huge, because we're talking about minimum investments, typically at $50,000. These are typically high net worth accredited investors. So there is a, perception challenge that you have to overcome, right? You don't want to look like you're being greedy or selfish or untrustworthy. Like, it is really important to be authentic. But I also think when you have given value, you've created this platform, you shared with these different investors and stories, and you've poured into your audience, it's okay to let people know how you can help them further. And that is that limited belief that you had to overcome, that I had to overcome. And some of it is imposter syndrome too, because there are certainly people in the space who have been around for 20 years and are experts and revered. And those individuals, by all means, they should be telling you, hey, if you want to learn, come sit down with the master. And I don't think me or even you back then, we didn't look at it that way. Certainly we added value, we could add value, but I certainly didn't see myself as the number one multifamily expert on the planet, and I wasn't trying to be that individual. So I think part of it is coming to the realization that you don't have to carry that weight or that perception. You have value. If you didn't, they wouldn't listen to you. Yeah. So it's okay to simply let people know how you can help them further. Yep. You're not pushing them. You're not making them buy something. You're simply giving them an opportunity to extend the relationship. So that we all should be able to do it. If you picture it that way, it becomes less daunting, and you don't have a whole lot of, I want to call it responsibility, but you're not tied to the outcome, right? Like you said, oh yeah, 20 calls is not a lot. I don't know if you had an expectation of how many calls you would have, because that could also be,
I thought it would be like 5. I thought
so
maybe go, 5
right?
people.
So there you go, right? And if it was only 5, great. There are 5 people who think you can help them achieve their financial goals, right? So I think sometimes what happens is our ego kicks in, or again, this limiting belief, this fear, And that stops us from maybe taking that action or that step that we should be taking. And that's why it is so important to root it in your customer, right? Or root it in your listener, because you would absolutely make sure you extended an opportunity to further help your listener. But when you look at it from your lens, as far as, hey, do I want to offer X, Y, Z, or should I do this, or should I charge for that? Well, now you're questioning your own value. And that's where it can get tricky versus simply say, hey, I want to put this out there. If people want it, great. And if they don't want it, maybe I'll get some feedback. Maybe it's priced wrong, or maybe there's not enough value in the right things, or maybe they're more interested in one-on-one and not the membership. So now you can get that feedback and you can tweak it. So just make sure you're actually serving the audience. It's such a key component to what you're trying to do. You asked the question, man, and I forgot completely what the question was now.
Well, before I ask a question, let me go back to 3 pieces of quotes that I pulled from what you said that I think that the listener is going to get so much value from. You mentioned when you have given value, so there's almost a precursor. That means that you're adding value to the right person on your show. When you have given value, it's okay to let them know how you can help them further. And then you said simply giving them an opportunity to extend the relationship. And I want to take that a little bit further, just a teens, and ask you what you think about this, because we have limiting beliefs. I absolutely have limiting beliefs all the time. I got myself, you and I, when we talked, John, you remember me as the chubby Adam, right? Don't lie.
I remember chubby. You got slim. You got slim and cut, but I wouldn't call you chubby back then.
Okay. So I was dad bod, and I had a lot of love handles and a lot on my gut. I drank way too much beer and wasn't working out enough. And I hired somebody, and they got me to 6-pack lean, and I was tiny, 167 pounds. And then I got up to almost 200 pounds, 190s, with lower than 10% body fat. So like shredded and muscly, right? And I thought to myself, I figured this out, because I hired 4 different coaches. I thought, I figured this out. I want to help other people do that. I want to help other people get fit and healthy and happy and more energy and look in the mirror and have more confidence and all these other things, be better at their business. But something held me back. Because I wasn't the best. And so for the last year or so, I've been wanting to help people do it, but I've only been doing it for free. And I've helped a good handful of people. They got down to the 6-pack lean, but I never dared to tell somebody that, hey, I want to help people get fit. I can do that, because I knew that my coach was the best, and I'm not anywhere close to him. I haven't had as much experience as him or anything like that. So I felt I'm not the right person. And it wasn't until the last few weeks that I'm going to go ahead and do that. And going back to, when you know that you have something, and it might not be for everybody, to just own it and just be okay with it. When you've given value on your podcast, it's okay to let your listener know that you can help them further. Simply give an opportunity to work with you and extend that relationship. And what I was going to ask you, John, is, do you believe that if you don't offer for that person who's listening to take those paid steps, that you're actually doing them a disservice by not offering?
Absolutely. And, it's very interesting here you talk about the fitness journey, because that was actually my journey into coaching, right? So you and I know on the apartment syndication side, the main thing is you have to find deals and raise capital for it. So that was my focus. My focus was on passive investors. It was not on active investors. It was not on coaching. I only want to talk to passive investors. I had my podcast. I had a meetup that I ran. I started to do a conference, and I did all these things to find passive investors. What I found was probably 4 out of 5 people I talked to were interested in being an active investor and doing what I was doing, not passive investing. So 4 out of 5 people, I would say, oh, sorry, I can't help you. Here's the coach that I used. Here's a book. Here's a resource. Here's a podcast. But I'm going to keep on this search. And it wasn't until I met a guy at my meetup. He was interested in coaching. I gave him my coach's information. and said, hey, here's a guy I use. He's a great coach. He hired that coach. And after hiring that coach, he called me for advice in the same area. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. You hired the same coach that I use. I know you got top-notch level information and access now. Why are you asking me these questions? And he's like, oh, well, I just really value your opinion. I wanted to get your thoughts on it. And it wasn't until that moment that I even believed I had enough value to be coaching other people. Right. And he paid my coach a handsome amount, like the salary I made when I first came into the industry. Right. So it wasn't like a small and significant number, but that was kind of the validation I needed. Now, again, I'd hosted a conference, meetups, podcasts. I had done all these things. So I knew I had the knowledge, but I hadn't really thought about charging people to pay me for the information. And that was something that was really important. So you asked about, if you don't offer, are you doing a disservice? The answer is yes, because most people, they need to take that leap with someone they trust. If they're listening to your podcast or getting to know you, we always talk about, they have to know, like, and trust you in order to do business with you. Well, they get to know you. They obviously like you if they're listening to the show. They trust you as an expert in the thing that you're talking about. So by extending that opportunity, they can work with you. I'll take this back in the same space. I've got books over here about real estate investing and syndication, and it never seemed real to me. Reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the ABCs of apartment investing, and those are like the first two books that really got me super excited. And in one of the books, I remember they say, your first deal can be 100-unit property or something like that. And it just sounded like the most ridiculous statement, you could ever put on paper. Like, how are you going to buy a 100-unit building, as your first deal? And I didn't realize, but what he was alluding to was investing passively into kind of a syndication type deal. Fast forward, I read other books, but I didn't know these people. The author was there, sure, but I didn't know them. It wasn't until I met someone in this space, right? I met my mentor in person. I would go to conferences, I would go to events, but I met my mentor because I went to an event, or I was online, and I had already started building up my own personal portfolio, but I needed to scale, and I knew I was going to have to work with other investors to make that happen. So I was connected with people. I wanted to learn about the city. I asked them to, hey, who's in Cincinnati? They all tagged my mentor, a guy named Joe Fearless. And I tagged or reached out to him and I said, hey, Joe, I'm coming to Cincinnati. A lot of people tagged you when I was looking for people to meet. Would you be willing to have lunch with me? And he said, sure. So we sat and had lunch. He told me, I had a coaching program. He had just raised $1 million for this deal. We had a similar background in advertising, and we had a connection. So I ended up hiring Joe to help me. Now, Joe has gone on to build a $2.7 billion portfolio. This coaching program is certainly more expensive than it was when I hired him. But the thing that jumped out was I knew him. I sat across from him. He was a real person. And I was more comfortable hiring him for all of those reasons, right? And that's the thing that we have as podcast hosts. People are getting to know you. And even though you may not sit down and have lunch with them, people really do feel like they're getting to know you because they are. They're listening to you. I mean, I've got over 650 podcasts. Most of them are between 30 and 45 minutes. So that's over 325 hours minimum of airtime, right? Where people have had a chance to listen to me, to get to know me, to understand my views, my opinions, like the way I think about things. So they do know me. They may not know everything about me, but they do have a pretty good sense of who I am. So when I meet these individuals, or by the time they reach out and say, hey, I need help, or I'm interested in like I have a call after this wraps with someone who's interested in coaching, right? I don't know, but a lot of times they've been listening to me for months, weeks, or even a year. I have somebody reach out to me. He's like, I've been listening to the show for 2 years. I'm ready for coaching now, and I want to work with you. So we have to extend that opportunity so someone can actually question themselves. Hey, where am I in my journey? Am I ready for this coaching step? What do I need to do to get ready? How much is the investment? Can I commit that time? Like, they have to go through that process so they can learn, do I really want this? Or are you just pretending? Are you dreaming? And there's nothing wrong with dreaming. But if you're listening to these shows to dream about launching your own podcast one day, or, oh, I really wish I could grow it one day, that's fine. but recognize that nothing is going to happen until you take action. When I think about the success that I've had, it all stems from taking action. Hiring a coach, launching the podcast, looking at the podcast and then rebranding the podcast, getting out there on social media, getting out there and being a guest on other podcasts. You have to take action. Hire mentors, hire vendors, hire partners that can help you launch your show, grow your show, connect with investors, get more clients. That is the only way to get real success. It can't be in your head, right? It can't just be a dream. You got to make it reality.
Yeah. Let's take a quick 30-second break. Can we get back? I want to talk about the different options that we have for a why to start a podcast, because we are talking about the whys for a podcast. And I want to figure out, like, how do we make that listener, help that listener today think through, what is my why? We'll be right back.
Hey, my friend, as you know, this episode is sponsored by my company, GrowYourShow.com. We want you to be able to have the best tools at your disposal without costing you a whole arm and a leg. So right now you can get a free list of vetted equipment that, like mics, mixers, webcams, sound treatment, editing software, everything that you need. I created the whole PDF with direct purchase links just to save you time and money, to help it be more convenient for you. So this free PDF will help you skip all the guesswork. If it's on there, it's vetted and approved by yours truly. And if it's not on there, it's probably not worth the money. So go ahead and get yours at growyourshow.com/PDF. Let's get back into the show.
We're back with John Casmon from Multifamily Insights, talking about knowing your why, understanding your why, and making that the reason that your business can be successful through your podcast. John, you've got a few different whys that the listener might have. What are those whys?
Yeah, so the first reason you might want to launch a podcast is it's definitely a great marketing tool or PR tool to get in front of your ideal client or your ideal investor. So that's the first one. If you're going to do that, think about that client, think about that investor. What do they need? What questions do they have? What challenges do they face? Make sure you're creating a platform that can address those issues, just like you're doing with the Grow Your Show, just like we try to do with our Multifamily Insights. Make sure you're focused on that client or that investor if that's one of your whys. You may just keep going with the other ones?
Yeah, absolutely. That was all right. Let's go right through them, and then I'll ask questions at the end.
So the second why is for help. You know, you're looking for information. When I was starting out, I wanted to know how to find the best places to invest. It was something that I really needed help with. I was talking to people who operated mainly in Texas, and Texas real estate is very, very different than Midwest real estate. So the things that I was hearing, the direction I was getting, the rule of thumbs, none of it matched what I was seeing. So I needed to find folks who were really more market agnostic to teach me really what to look for, no matter where I was, if you drop me anywhere on the planet. So that's helpful. And then if you have a service, right? I'm a parent. When you have children, you might have a podcast because you want to be the best version of yourself, right? You're looking for help to be a better parent, maybe more calm, more patient, more gentle. Maybe you have young athletes. You're trying to figure out how do I get them to perform better or have better mindset, right? So you're looking for help or information. The third reason you may want to launch a podcast and your why would be for authority or fame. Now, yes, there's a little bit of ego here, but if you want to be seen as the expert in your field, this is a great way to do that, right? To connect with people, to share the knowledge that you have. If you want to be a speaker or you want to have a greater stage, this is a great way to do that. So create that authority, establish yourself as a trusted expert or a trusted advisor, and understanding that gives you a reason to launch a show. And you see that all the time with different people in space, particularly where it's more of a niche and they can stand out by, having conversations that maybe the industry is not having. And then the last reason to launch a podcast is through relationships. And this goes back to a little bit on the client side. Maybe you're looking to connect with people. One of the things that I do now with my show is I try to bring on people who could be ideal clients, because it's a great way to understand their challenge. It's almost like a market research or a focus group of one, where you get to ask questions about the business. What challenges do they face? And I find those to be really good conversations. But beyond the business side of it, just you see how many podcasts are out there where it's friends. It's 2 or 3 guys or 2 or 3 girls, and they're sitting down together and they're just chatting about whatever the conversation is because they enjoy it. So if you want to forge some strong relationships, maybe bring on some guests, focusing on that as your why is certainly a great reason to do so.
Perfect. I'm going to wrap up a little bit about what we learned, because we've learned a lot from you today on this episode. We talked about knowing your why. We talked about 4 different whys: gaining clients or investors that you want to work with, learning or getting help or information to be better at your craft, for example. Third was building your authority or fame within a space. The fourth was to connect with and make relationships. And to that, you mentioned a trick that you utilize is to bring on the person that you could work with. So for me, as a podcast agency, I can interview somebody who has a podcast, and at the end, maybe we will work together. And you do that as well with potential coaching clients. You talked about how you came from marketing and advertising, so you had some experience there. You talked about the issue that can happen when the listener is starting a podcast or has a podcast already, but they weren't clear on what their podcast was supposed to be about. And that got you into 3 things to help us figure out our why and that clarity, which was, number 1, who is it for? Like, who is the audience? Who's your avatar? Number 2, what will they get out of it? What's the value or the big promise to my listener or my avatar? And number 3, how do I benefit? Like, how does my company get clients, or how do I get authority, or how do I learn? Whatever it is. You got to answer those 3 questions, and then you'll start to understand your why between the 4 reasons to start a podcast. And you might have 2 of them. You talked about your experience rebranding from Target Market Insights to Multifamily Insights. And by the way, to the listener, scroll down now, click on Multifamily Insights. You will be able to actually listen to John's podcast today. You also talked about, figuring out your why. And for you, it was, I want really passive investors. And the way that I had this set up, I was pulling in the wrong person. Don't make that mistake as well. You talked about making sure you are simple and direct. We also say clear and concise versus creative or catchy. You mentioned how those changes got you to grow your investor list and grow your coaching clients. You talked about how you were lacking a call to action in the beginning. For years, you had no CTA. And one of the most embarrassing things, one of the most interesting, simple things is you just mentioned to your listener that you could help them. And that grew the investor list and the coaching clients. I mentioned a little bit about how I did the 30 episodes in 30 days, all with simple ads, and it worked for me as well, just everything that you mentioned. And I love these 3 quotes. When you have given value, it's okay to let them know how you can help them further, simply giving them an opportunity to extend the relationship with you. And again, we'll wrap it up by mentioning those 4 things that are the whys. You might want to start your podcast or have a podcast to A, grow the amount of clients that you work with or the amount of investors that passively invest with you. Number 2, getting help or information within your craft or with what you want to do, whether it's becoming a better dad or what. Number 3, growing your authority or fame within your space. Number 4, connections and relationships. These are the reasons you might want your podcast. And John, what do you want to share I'll give you the last bit of advice for our listener who is a podcaster who wants similar success to what you've seen.
I think the biggest thing, if you already have a podcast, just think about the podcast. Just carve out time to really think about your show, what you do well. Think about other podcasts in your space that are maybe achieving more success and learn from them. You can absolutely borrow ideas from other shows, but make sure you're serving your audience. If you're doing that, you're going to see success. And don't worry so much about the vanity metrics. It's easy to get caught up in like downloads and things like that. No, they're certainly important. But ultimately, if you're running a business out of it, make sure the main thing's the main thing. Are you getting clients out of it? Are you growing your connections with potential investors or, clients or whatever it is with your business? Lock in on those things and leverage that podcast to help you as efficiently as you can.
I love it. John's information is all down in the show notes. So if you wanted to connect with him on social, all the social that he would want you to connect with him, that's already down in the show notes. The website to his business and his coaching, down in the show notes, and also his podcast. Go check out his show, Multifamily Insights, and I'll see you on the next episode.
You're not alone if you're ready to either get your very first affordable microphone or if you're ready to upgrade your equipment to some legit podcasting studio equipment. Because on all of the forums over the last few months, I'm seeing this all the time. Even my own personal clients that work with my team, they're ready to get that next microphone. They're asking us for it. Additionally, when I'm on discovery calls with potential clients, they're always asking for this stuff. Hey, what mic do you recommend? Hey, what lighting do you recommend? What webcam should I be using? So many questions. And so what we did, my whole team has put together a PDF so that if you're one of those people who is looking to either get your very first affordable microphone, or if you're ready to upgrade your equipment to more professional podcast studio equipment, whether it's soundproofing or whatever, we've got you covered by going to growyourshow.com/PDF. And you can download the PDF for free, or right there on the webpage is everything that you would have and you don't need to download the PDF. Either way, just go to growyourshow.com/PDF, which will put you to the podcasting equipment that me and my team have personally vetted. I'll see you on the next episode.